The principle there would be harm reduction towards the society. So that's what would justify like the positive role of the government to maybe enforce smoking bans in a restaurant, or, maybe there's a smoking only section. The red tape should be removed and they should be reduced down to kind of like universal programs. You're restricted in your freedom, quote unquote, to like walk up and shoot whoever you want, but that enables more of society the freedom to safely traverse the streets, right?
Liberalism based on your individual rights, and that your individual rights shouldn't be trampled by some tyranny of the majority.
Yeah, that's a bit more libertarian. I would say the liberal belief would be a bit more positive liberty, while what you're describing is negative liberty. I don't know if you're aware, kind of like...
Liberalism, as far as I can see, the central insight of liberalism is that people should be free to pursue their vision of the good life, and that or define what their vision of the good life is, and then subject to certain considerations like the harm principles. The idea is you start on an assumption of maximal freedom, and then you justify in a free and democratic society what types of infringements can be maintained.
Yeah, I would just say I think the first principle should also be something like harm reduction or something of the sort like that. And then in terms of setting parameters, and then liberalism can exist within that is what I would say, something along those lines.
Oh, I don't know if it makes sense to say that the primary goal of liberalism is harm reduction. Because there are going to be a bunch of things like, for example, like smoking or overeating, things that it's incumbent in a liberal society for them not to exercise undue constraint on your ability to hurt you. Like extreme sports where you are very likely to hurt yourself. And then so I thought doesn't that seem like an issue with the primary goal is harm reduction?
So if I could, what I would say that I would think kind of for me would put into example the difference here, your example about smoking and how liberalism, it would be antithetical because that would, for harm reduction, because that is something that harms the individual. I would think the principle there would be harm reduction towards the society. So that's what would justify like the positive role of the government to maybe enforce smoking bans in a restaurant, or, maybe there's a smoking only section where that liberalism can still exist for you to have the choice to smoke, but not in a way that takes away other people's freedom to not have the harm of smoke,
Yeah, I understand. I'm not against regulation or government intervention. I wasn't saying that shouldn't happen and it's not justified. That wasn't part of how I'm describing liberalism.
Yeah, and I think the shift was more, just to put in more layman's terms, I think Kirby could probably go more in depth about what they were talking about, but the shift was away from that kind of libertarian negative liberty view and more towards a positive liberty view, more so towards the equal opportunity to act rather than the removal of restriction, right? So restrictions can be justified and can still be seen as enabling freedom if it is enabling more people the opportunity to act. Like a good example that I use is you're restricted in your freedom, quote unquote, to walk up and shoot whoever you want, but that enables more of society the freedom to safely traverse the streets, right?
I would probably be one of those people who says it's not too much or too little, but too wrong, in some instances.
Where do you think it's wrong?
Well, there was a good article I was reading a while ago called Kludgeocracy, which, you know what a kludge is? It's a makeshift kind of jerry-rigged solution from just whatever happens to be lying around.
Okay.
And so they're just saying that one of the things that happens with the law isn't that the government is too big or too small, but it's too complex and it's too opaque, and it allows bad faith actors and corrupt manipulators to so you get into a situation where no governor or no senator or whatever can actually understand the law, so they can become dependent on consultant groups and people who can provide summaries and inform them, which always have a certain slant.
I'm curious, and I mean, if you don't have a specific example, but did you have sectors or a specific thing or something? Is it you mentioned the tax code? Because I would agree with you on things I think the tax code is a bit too probably. I think in housing, a lot of the what we have in America about our red tape with building housing, but I think in other parts the complexity is somewhat necessary, the way we distribute Medicaid, doing it through federally funding, but through the states, I think allows a lot more autonomy for the states to provide more care to its people. So I think in some parts, yes, but in other parts I might disagree with you. So I was just curious, like, what your examples may be.
Do you know Johnny Harris?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You ever see he did this thing about the poverty industrial complex that it actually went through a bunch of different programs and showed how the ones that are like directly given by the federal government, like when they end up doing these state things, the states often end up engaging private actors in public-private partnerships, and then these private actors end up like,
keeping
services to the most possible point where they can extract
keep as much money as they can. Possible. Yeah, I completely agree. That's a huge problem.
Payments, and so like I don't know if I care about that as much as I'm just like, oh, this is a simpler system. Like it's the same reason why universal programs will probably be better to advocate for the means tested programs.
Yeah. Okay. So then
you could be against the size of government in terms of complexity, not in terms of like I care about just the absolute size of the federal workforce. Like,
okay. Then yeah, I don't think we would really disagree if your position is kind of things should, like the red tape should be removed and they should be reduced down to kind of like universal programs, because I would agree with you there.
Probably. The thing that concerns me is the emphasis on the individual trumping the community, which is kind of built right into it. Like when I'm thinking in terms of the law, like, so I'm a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And when I think about like the way these conflicts happen is like, oh, this person has some historical property and then they want to do this to it. And then there's this historical land use thing. And then we have to argue about whether those are justified. And if it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, you end up arguing about whether a few things. They ask, okay, there's a government program. Have you established that it infringes on a right? Have you established then that and then you move on to test, okay, given that it's infringed on a right, how do you determine if that infringement is justified? Ezra Klein's got a whole bunch of proposals. Like, if you're a liberal, I'm sure you like kind of have a thing for Ezra Klein a little bit. Like, I want to read abundance and see what that's about.
To be fair, I'm a bit to the left of Ezra Klein. I'm probably more of a progressive than like a liberal, but I mean, he does raise some interesting things in what he brings up, and I agree with him on, like, in housing. I think he's spot on. I think that in America we have, and to be fair, I don't know like the extent of his entire plan, but when he talks about like cutting red tape and how these things are too bureaucratic and it's going through too many kind of like you said, hands of like these public-private partnerships, it's diluting the service by the time it gets to the individual. I do think those are huge problems, especially in healthcare and housing and childcare too, and it seems like you agree, I would lean towards doing away with the red tape and moving towards some sort of universal structure for these programs.